There are two different areas in which a Rav is active in halakha. The one is the area of isu v'heter, something that's permitted and something that's forbidden. And the difference is Kodesh and chol, something which is Kodesh, something which is holy, and something which is chol, which is regular. And they're very different, and the skills required in each one is different. In the case of isu v'heter, when you're deciding, is something allowed or isn't it allowed? Is an individual allowed to do A, or to eat A, or to have A, or B? And to be able to understand those differences, you're not only looking at the object, you're also looking at the subject. And that's what all the shaylas and shuvas are written about. How do you resolve a situation where an individual has a problem caused by halakha? How do we navigate that to allow a person to do something or to not allow a person to do? That's the whole world of shaylas and shuvas and psak. But there's another area, which is the area of Kodesh and chol, where there are different sets of halakha that applies to things that are Kodesh, to things that are holy and have sanctity, and things that are chol. And to be able to separate those things out, it's not just that everything has sanctity. There's kedusha everywhere. Yes, there's kedusha everywhere. Kol ha'aretz malei kavod. But in halacha, there's kodesh and there's chol, and we've got to be mavdil ben kodesh lechol. We've got to separate between kodesh lechol. A shul is kodesh. Outside the shul is chol. The moment you walk through that door, the halachot change. The halachot that govern the place, the halachot that govern your behavior, they completely change. Is there kedusha outside as well? Yes, there is kedusha, but it's not kodesh. Kodesh is when you come into the shul. Kodesh is Shabbos. The moment Shabbos is out, it's chol. Different sets of halachot apply to Kodesh and to chol. In deciding what is Kodesh and what is chol, there's no subjectivity. You're not looking at the person. When a Rov's deciding isu v'heter, he gets into your life. What's your background? Who are you? What's the situation? Why are you finding it difficult? What's happening in your life at the moment? A Rov needs to go deeply into the circumstances of the person, but when you're deciding Kodesh and chol, it's yes or no. And there has to be a great deal of clarity of thinking, of clarity of thought and of vision. In the first case, there is a lot of empathy and a lot of identification and a lot of human understanding. In the second case, it has nothing to do with empathy and human understanding. It is or it isn't. And that's a different process of psak. And understanding that difference will emerge from the Gemara that we're doing. We start with some psukim in Parsha Shmini, where Hashem says to Aaron, you may not drink wine or beer, or the way Chazal learn it, and Rashi brings it, you may not bring yayin v'shechar, wine in a way that could cause drunkenness. You and your children, when you come to Oil Moed, etc., ulahavdil, not only when you come into Oil Moed, but also ulahavdil ben HaKodesh uvein HaChol, to separate between Kodesh and Chol. Be careful you haven't drunk before you do that. And to teach the Bnei Yisrael all the laws which they have is the din that is given to us in Shmini in this case. So the Gemara in our sugya goes into the question of three different categories that cause a chilul, that can disqualify the avodah of a korban, the service of a korban. The one category is shtuye yayin. This category here, somebody who's had something to drink, a kohen who's affected by alcohol. The second is mechusar begodim. He doesn't have the clothes of the kohen on him. And the third is mechutzer rechitzer yadayim v'raglayim. He hasn't washed his hands and feet. Those are three cases the Gemara talks about. Initially, the Gemara wanted to learn shtuye yayin from these psukim, from these verses here. From here we learn that the kohen is not allowed to go into the Beis Hamikdash having drunk, and if he does, his avodah is posul. But the Gemara then comes and learns it from Gzera Shava, which we'll see in a moment. The Gemara learns it from elsewhere. So then the Gemara says, Ela lahavdil lamali. So what do we do with these clear psukim, which seem to be indicating that a kohen is not allowed to go into the Beis Hamikdash and do avodah? What does that come to teach? If I learn shtuye yayin, if I learn the fact that one who is a kohen who is drunk disqualifies the korban, if I learn that from Gzera Shava, why do I need a lahavdil? Answers the Gemara, lichid de Rav, you need it for the principle of Rav. De Rav lo muki mamoiro alei miyom etava lechavre mishum shikrus. Because Rav didn't used to give a drosha on Yom Tov from after the time he made Kiddush in the morning until the next day, until after Yom Tov. Why not? Says Rashi, lo mukim amor ala lemedrash befirki miyom etava lechavre misha'a she'achal v'shata v'asa yom tov ad lemachar. From the time he made his yom tov and he ate and he drank until the next day, dehachi mashma kra yain v'shechar al tesh bevoachem v'chein b'sha'a she'ata ba lehavdil ulohorot bein davar kedusha ledavar chol. And so when you, the Rov, are making decisions about what is Kodesh and what is chol, you can't be under the influence of alcohol. Al tishikrus, there should be no shikrut there, explains Rashi. So there are a few things that we need to have a look at in this Rashi, two things specifically. The one is, Rav's not talking about deciding matters of Kodesh and chol. Rav's giving his Yom Tov drosha. It says quite clear, Lo mukim ameiru alei medrash befirkin. He didn't give his normal medrash here on Yom Tov. He didn't give his drosha on Yom Tov. He's not making decisions between Kodesh l'chol. Where does Rashi get this from? V'chein b'sha'ah she'ata ba להבדיל orot bein davar kedusha ledavar chol. And secondly, why does Rashi say bein davar kedusha ledavar chol, and doesn't Rashi say bein ha'asur v'hamutar? If a Rov is making a decision as to what's permitted and what is forbidden, he's not allowed to. We're not talking about it from a perspective of kahuna. With this case of Rav lo mokim amoru alei miyom etava lechavri mishum shikrus, that's not talking about bringing korbanot. Rav was a Rov. He was a Rosh Yeshiva. He was teaching. It was about his droshes we're talking about. If it's about his droshes, firstly, what's it got to do with paskening? He's just giving a drosha. And secondly, why is it davar kedusha ledavar lehorot bein davar kedusha ledavar chol? So the Gemara in Krisus says, there's a Gemara we'll come to in Krushis, which brings the same thing. And the Gemara there says, Shani Rav de Oiri Mori. Rav is different because he used to paskin shailas. Ask Gemara v'neikem teloloi. Let's say it's talking about a case there where he's not paskening shailas. Answers the Gemara an amazing comment. Kol heicha de yativ Rav lo sagi le belo hora'ah. Wherever Rav was, he was giving hora'ah, he was paskening. Hora'ah means teaching. Hora'ah means showing the way. Hora'ah means psak. Wherever Rav was, you can't say Rav was there, but he wasn't paskening. Rashi learns because people used to always line up and ask him shailas. Rav couldn't be in a place without asking shailas. But that Rashi is difficult because that Gemara's question still applies. So let's say Rav didn't answer shailas. But why shouldn't he give a drosha? What should be the problem there? The Maharam Shif on our Gemara says something very interesting, a little different. Mishum derav oiri avimori bidar shotav, because Rav used to give psak in his droshas. Rav didn't just give a drosha that was a nice idea, a vort on the parsha. That wasn't Rav. When Rav gave a drosha, it was a psak. There was a psak halacha. It made a difference. There was something to change your life. This wasn't just an interesting idea. That professors do that. That's not what a Rov does. A Rov gives psak. And we have a Rambam where the Rambam says an amazing Rambam in the first parak of Bias HaMikdash. Umutar l'shikol l'lamed Torah. If you're going to give a vort on the parsha, you can do it even if you're drunk. Even if you've had a l'chaim, you want to give a vort on the parsha, it's okay. V'afil halachot midrashot. And you want to talk halacha, you want to give a Mishnah Brura, you want to quote from the Shulchan Aruch, it's also okay. Or medrashas, if you're going to talk about the medrash, for sure you're going to give a vort, no problem if you're drunk. V'hu shelo yoyreh, but don't pasken. V'im haya chacham kavua lo hora'ah, and if you're the person in the community who gives direction, that's your role. Lo yelamed, you shouldn't teach at all if you've had something to drink. Nothing. Why? Shelimudo hora'ahi. Because when he teaches, it doesn't matter what he's teaching. He's teaching a Rashi, he's teaching a Medrash, it's hora'ah. It's teaching you how to live. And you can't teach a person how to live without being able to clearly see the difference between Kodesh and chol. Because that's really what life is about, what Jewish life is about, is understanding the differences between Kodesh and chol. What is Kodesh and what is chol? Not just in places and in time. To understand a shul is Kodesh and the marketplace is chol, that Shabbos is Kodesh and Sunday is chol, but even thoughts. When is a thought a thought of Kedusha? When is a thought a thought of chol? And what is the difference between them? And the whole issue that came up in the early yeshivas in Volozhin and other yeshivas about teaching secular subjects in the yeshiva and the enormous opposition of the Rosh Yeshiva, of the yeshivas in Lithuania at that time, even just an hour a day, an hour a week to teach something secular. And that could have kept the yeshiva of Volozhin open. They were willing to allow the government to close it down rather than to introduce limudei chol into the yeshiva. There wasn't a problem. If somebody wanted to go out of the yeshiva and learn a bit of mathematics, they used to do that. They wanted to go out of the yeshiva and learn some philosophy or history or language. They used to do that, but not in the yeshiva. להבדיל בין Kodesh chol. One has to understand the difference between Kodesh and chol. One has to understand what it is to open a cell phone when you're in a shul. That's להבדיל בין Kodesh chol. You're in a different kind of a place. One has to understand how you speak on Shabbos and how you speak on... To להבדיל בין Kodesh chol, to understand that. And when the Rov who is kavua lahora'ah, when the Rov who's looked up to give direction to a community, it doesn't matter what he's speaking about. He's always being mavdil ben Kodesh chol. He's always giving an approach, how to see things. That we often talk about how to see things through the lens of Torah, how to understand what Kedusha is and what chol is. And therefore he can't do that at all. Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch understands these psukim as the problem with it is matzav sheyesh bo makom gadol lachshosh letishtush betzlilut hadat. We don't want the kohen, or the rov in this case, to have any unclarity of thought while he's making these decisions, or while he's looking at Kodesh l'chol, or while he's teaching according to the Rambam. His mind has to be clear. I want to suggest to you that that's not what this halach is about. It's actually not about clarity of mind. Of course, you've got to have clarity of mind. But then the halacha would be about what you drink, how much you drink. It's even very small amounts. Doesn't seem to be what it's about. And particularly, since our Gemara, as we mentioned, lands up learning this din of you can't be influenced by alcohol when you go into the Beis HaMikdash, our Gemara lands up learning it from a Gzeira Shova, not from these psukim. What is the Gzeira Shova? The same word chukah is used, Rashi brings it, chukah b'shtuye yayin, chukah bebigadim, mechusa begadim, and chukah b'rechitzat yad v'regel. The word chukah appears in all of these three disqualifications. If you've drunk wine, or you don't have the right clothes on, or you've not washed your hands and feet. That's Gzeira Shova. Gzeira Shova is more than it happens to be that there's a word that appears in all three places. Gzeira Shova also teaches you that there is some linkage between the concepts. If that's the case, not washing your hands doesn't affect clarity of mind. Not wearing the right clothes doesn't affect clarity of mind. But the truth is, in a way, it does. So when we're talking about clarity of mind, we're not just talking about clarity of mind in terms of having drunk of chemical substance. We're talking about mindset. We're talking about how you go into a situation. One of the ways you prepare yourself is to get dressed in the right clothes. It's not about being dressed right. It's about getting dressed right. It's about changing your clothes when you go from one to another, when you go from Kodesh to chol, when you go from chol to Shabbos. You might have two people, a very poor person who on Shabbos is wearing very simple clothes, and a rich person who on Shabbos is wearing amazing clothes, and they're both wearing Shabbos clothes. Because what's important about Shabbos clothes? What's important about is it's not the same clothes you wore on Friday, and on Thursday and on Wednesday. And in Halacha, we see how important it is to have Shabbos clothes that are set aside for Shabbos. There were Gedolei Yisrael who kept underclothing special for Shabbos, socks special for, and everything special for Shabbos, that they didn't use the same, because it's about changing for Shabbos. It's not just about having them on. That's preparation. And the rechitzas yadayim v'raglayim, washing your hands, it's not so that your hands are clean. If your hands are dirty, you've got to wash them again. It's after your hands are clean, you've got to wash them. Why are you washing them? To prepare. It's one of the ways we prepare ourselves for the day, we wash ourselves. To prepare ourselves for a meal, we wash. To prepare ourselves for davening, we wash our hands. Washing hands is an act of preparation. Not drinking wine before you're going into a certain situation is also an act of preparation. So it's the creation of that space, it's the act of preparation. It's not so that you won't be inebriated. It's that I didn't drink wine. Why? Because I realize I'm going to be giving a drosha later on. I'm going to be giving a shir. I can't drink wine at the moment. That's how you prepare yourself. That's how you prepare your mind space. And that's why we learned in Shavuos a din from Rabbi Yochanan that להבדיל בין הטמא ובין הטהור talks about kol hapores meishto samuch levesta. when a man realizes that he should avoid intimacy with his wife before she becomes a nida, not when she becomes a nida. That means he's creating a mindset of something has to change. There's separation here. And he creates that separateness. Mindset is to separate myself. We talk about Kedusha being prishut, separating myself for the purpose of something specific. That's what Kedusha is. That's what understanding what Kodesh is. So when the Torah tells us להבדיל בין Kodesh chol, that's far more than just not coming into the Beis Hamikdash. So if we look at Rashi, we now understand. What does Rashi say in the case of Rav? He didn't give his drosha. Why? What's with the drosha? So we see from the Rambam, Rav was somebody who the community looked at to show the way. If it's showing the way, even if it's a regular drosha, he can't do it. So why does Rashi say ben davar kedusha l'davar chol? Because that's what a Rav does in his drosha. He teaches people to understand the difference between Kodesh and chol. In everything that he's teaching the difference between Kodesh and chol. If you're teaching the difference between Kodesh and chol, as Hirsch says himself, when it comes to these kind of psak halacha, we don't use eino kochot regesh v'dimyon ragshaniyim u'me'ur palim. When you're deciding Kodesh and chol, you don't need these more feminine qualities of empathy and sympathy and imagination and understanding circumstances. You need absolute clarity of thought and absolute accuracy, because it's either Kodesh or it's chol, and you've got to understand exactly what it is when you're teaching. The same when you're talking about a position. We read things in the paper, we are affected by the media, we talk to one another. Are the ideas we're picking up ideas of Kodesh, or are they ideas of chol? Even the ideas we're picking up, how we look at the peace process that we're talking about at the moment, how we look at the war, all of these things, are the opinions we're gathering and the viewpoints we're developing, viewpoints and opinions of Kodesh or of chol? That's part of what Rav would teach in his droshes, and that's what Rashi says, L'horot bein davar kedusha l'davar chol. Even if he's just giving a drosha on Yom Tov, that's considered to be l'horot bein davar kedusha l'davar chol. And just as the Kohen has to separate himself, you can be absolutely sure that Rav washed his hands before the drosha, and you can be absolutely sure that Rav put on his special clothes, he put on his jacket and his hat, and he came to his shir properly dressed, that he did that as well. And of course that he was careful before the shir not to be influenced by alcohol, so that he would have not so that he won't be clear in his mind, just as an act of preparation, just as washing your hands is not so that they won't be dirty, so not drinking before is not so that you won't be shikr, it's so that you've properly prepared your mind for what you're about to do.